It's January 2014, and we're in the north of Mexico, in the city of San Fernando. A young woman named Karen is driving along a road in a pickup truck. She's approaching a junction, and she slows down to a halt. Suddenly, as she prepares to pull out, two cars appear out of nowhere. They pull up right next to her, one on her left, the other on her right. Karen is trapped. The car doors open and a group of men appear. They're holding guns. They force their way into Karen's truck and overpower her, dragging her out of the driver's seat. They get in, slam the door shut, and drive off, Karen in tow. She's just been kidnapped by one of Mexico's most lethal cartels. Miles away, a phone rings. It belongs to Karen's mum, Miriam. When she hears what's happened, she vows to get her daughter back and track down the people who took her. 81 people go missing every day in Mexico, and the numbers have exploded in the last decade. It's been called a humanitarian crisis. This is the story of one of those kidnappings and of the mother who spent years pursuing justice. This is True Crime Reports, a global crime show from Al Jazeera. Today's episode, The Mum Who Fought a Cartel. San Fernando is a small city in the northeast of Mexico. This is where Miriam Rodríguez was born in 1960. Miriam has a kind, round face and sharp eyes.
Siempre andaba maquillada con un corte de cabello y pintadito su cabello, impecable, sus uñas bien hechas, una mujer vestida que a mí me impresionaba.
This is María Jaramillo Alanís. She's a journalist and she knew Miriam well. They'd started working together as part of a collective for families of missing people that Miriam set up.
Era una mujer que se preparaba para toda la ocasión. Creo que Miriam era espectacular.
Miriam owns a small shop in San Fernando, selling cowboy apparel, hats, jackets, boots. And she and her husband have a son and two daughters. Azalia is the eldest. Then comes Luis, and then Karen. Now, San Fernando is an extremely dangerous place to live. It's in the state of Tamaulipas and sits on a main road, Federal Highway 101. If you follow that highway north, in less than 100 miles, you'll reach the US border. This means that San Fernando has become a key route for human and drug trafficking and a battleground for cartels. There are more people missing in this region than anywhere else in Mexico, over 5,000 in 2015. Here's María.
Que son los grupos delincuenciales, es quienes hicieron violenta la ciudad, no es la población en sí. Su población es sobreviviente de toda una etapa de violencia generada por grupos delincuenciales. Ellos han sido víctimas, esta población, de asaltos, asesinatos, de extorsiones, secuestros, robo de mercancías, robo de ranchos ganaderos.
There's one cartel that's very influential here, called Los Zetas, or the Zetas. In 2011, they made headlines when they staged the San Fernando massacre. They murdered 193 migrants, mainly from Central America, and dumped their bodies in a mass grave just outside the city.
Este grupo armado se caracterizaba por su extrema violencia, por la hazaña con la que actuaban en contra de rivales, del tráfico de drogas.
Ricardo Ravelo is a journalist who's covered organized crime and Mexican cartels for decades. He wrote a book about the Zetas and is very familiar with this story.
Un dato que ilustra esto es que ellos pusieron de moda la modalidad de muerte conocida como la decapitación, el desmembramiento de cuerpos que incorporaron a sus actividades de violencia.
The Zetas were formed in the late 90s by 34 members of the Mexican Army's Special Forces. Ricardo says that by the 2010s, they'd grown into what was essentially an army.
Este cártel independiente estaba conformado por civiles y militares en retiro, de tal suerte que la organización criminal comenzó a dominar muchísimos territorios en México.
So, by 2014, many bar and restaurant owners in San Fernando have closed shop because of the violence. Houses have been abandoned and countless people have fled. Karen's brother Luis is one of them. Karen and her sister Azalea, though, decided to stick it out. Karen's 20. She has a young face, round cheeks, and blonde hair. Since she finished school, she's helped out at her mum's cowboy shop, Rodeo Boots. She looks after it when her mum's away, because Miriam's got another job as a nanny in Texas. So during the week, she's 100 miles north in the city of McAllen, right next to the Mexican border. And it's on one such Thursday, towards the end of January, when Miriam's in Texas, when the cartels come for her family. It's 4 a.m. when her phone rings. It's her eldest daughter, Azalea. Miriam immediately asks what's happened. Something awful, her daughter replies. With Karen. Miriam quickly packs her things, leaves the family a message saying she's had to leave and won't be back, and runs for the bus. It's a 2-hour journey back home along Highway 101. Sitting near the back of the bus, Miriam cries. Another passenger, an elderly man, hands her a handkerchief and asks if she's okay. When she explains that her daughter's been kidnapped by the infamous Zetas, the man nods. He scribbles something on a piece of paper and gives it to her. It's the number for his son, Alex. Alex is in the Mexican Marines, a group who often stand in for the police, known for getting their hands dirty. The man tells her to ring that number if she ever needs help. Back home, the ransom demands begin. The cartel rings Miriam and her husband and tells them they need to pay up. Sometimes they put Karen on the phone. She screams down the line at her parents to do what they say. So they do. They end up paying 3 ransoms, totaling around $12,000. In one case, a member of the cartel reaches out to Miriam directly and tells her he'll help her get Karen back if she pays him. They meet at a restaurant. The man is slender, clean-shaven, and young. He's got a walkie-talkie, and Miriam can just make out what the cartel members are saying to each other. At one point, someone refers directly to the young man she's sat opposite. They call him Sama. So she's got his name, but she's no closer to Karen. The man's promises turn out to be empty. She pays him the ransom, $2,000, but after a week, he stops answering her calls and disappears. Ricardo, the journalist who reports on organized crime, says ransoms were a big part of how the Zetas functioned.
Este dinero se utilizaba para pagar a los proveedores de droga, colombianos, panameños, etc., para movilizar también la droga a nivel de la República Mexicana y fuera de las fronteras, para la compra de armamento. Es decir, el secuestro en realidad era una de las actividades que utilizaban para capitalizarse, ¿no? Y para poder mantener el tráfico de drogas. Hubo muchísimos secuestros de empresarios acaudalados en México que pues terminaron pagando rescates millonarios, y quienes no pagaban pues bueno, aparecían muertos.
It's been a month since Karen disappeared. Miriam and her husband have paid all the ransoms they can. They've wiped their savings accounts and have taken out a bank loan. But still, there's no Karen. One day, Miriam tells her daughter Asalia she's reached a state of acceptance. She knows Karen's probably dead. She tells her daughter she can feel it. But she won't rest until she finds the people who did this. She tells Azalia she'll hunt them down one by one until the day she dies. A few weeks later, Miriam is driving through the central plaza of San Fernando when she notices two young women on a bench. They're laughing and looking at a laptop in front of them. It's not clear how, but Miriam recognizes the laptop. It's Karen's. She parks her car and takes out a slip of paper. It's the one the elderly man gave her on the bus. She rings the number on it and gets through to Alex, the man's son, the Marine. Ricardo explains that the Marines often take the place of law enforcement in Mexico because corruption and bribery run so deeply through all other areas of public life.
Yo creo que por esa razón la madre de Karen no recurrió al apoyo de la policía en Tamaulipas, sino que recurrió al apoyo de los marinos, porque en ese tiempo los marinos tenían una imagen de mayor confiabilidad, simplemente porque son eficaces en su tarea de perseguir y detener a grupos criminales. Cuando hay que usar la fuerza, la usan. Cuando es posible solo llevar a cabo la captura, la realizan.
Alex agrees to help. Within minutes, he and a team of Marines arrive and take the two women, who haven't moved from the bench, away. It turns out they've hit the jackpot. Somehow, Miriam doesn't know how, the Marines find out where Karen might be. So when nighttime falls, they stage a raid. We're on the outskirts of San Fernando. A dirt track leads out of the city, across some fields, eventually ending in a ranch. This is one of the many sites where the Zetas operate, and it's here that the two women have brought the Marines and Miriam. She insisted on coming. The Marines descend on the ranch. Yells puncture the cool night air, followed by gunfire. There are some Zetas inside, but they're no match for the Marines. Soon, Miriam sees several figures flee from the building into the nearby woods. The Marines move in. Inside the ranch, they find the bodies of 4 Zetas that they've killed, 3 men and a woman. Miriam, smaller than the rest and dressed in a disguise, starts to look for Karen. Here's Maria.
Esta redada de Miriam, y es temerario, es un acto heroico, aunque vayan los marinos, la Secretaría de Marina, que son la gente más preparada de armas en nuestro país.
It's an eerie place. Outside are the remains of old tractors and plows. A yellow noose hangs from a tree. There are bones and human remains, including a pregnant woman's, and bullet holes pepper the walls.
Creo que fue temerario. Creo que la movía solo una razón: encontrar los restos de su hija, y no le importó correr ningún riesgo. Miriam era así.
She goes inside. The tables are covered in dark red stains and weapons that look like they've been used for torture. There are IDs scattered everywhere, including lanyards that look like they belong to government employees. The Marines quickly discover a few others on the property, kidnapping victims. None of them are Karen. On seeing their rescuers, one of them cries out that one of the Zetas, a woman, was about to cut off his head when they arrived. And then Miriam sees it, a scarf and a seat cushion. The scarf is Karen's, and the cushion is from her car. She was here. Fast forward about 6 months. It's September 2014, and we're about a 2-hour drive southwest of San Fernando, in the state capital of Ciudad Victoria. This is where months of following leads and hunting for clues have brought Miriam. She looks different. Her hair is now short and a fiery shade of red, and she's pacing around the streets of one of the city's neighbourhoods, dressed in the uniform of a government employee, armed with a clipboard. She's pretending to be taking a poll, but actually she's here to find a core member of the Zetas she's tracked down to this area. It all started with a mechanic. Back in January, he'd been kidnapped by the Zetas at the same time as Karen. Amazingly, he survived, and Miriam found him and quizzed him for every detail he could remember. He was terrified, but eventually, after weeks of questioning, he gave her the name of the head kidnapper, Sama. When Miriam heard the name, a spark of recognition flickered in her mind. She'd met him, the slender, clean-shaven man she sat opposite in the restaurant, whose name she heard coming out of a walkie-talkie. Maria says that Sama was just a hitman for the cartel.
En esa estructura que tienen los cárteles de la droga, Sama era un peón. Sama era un peón de los que hacía el trabajo sucio. Eran jóvenes, incluso que tendría 18 o 19 años, este mentado Sama. Pero es clave para que Miriam encuentre, Miriam y Luis, su hijo, encuentren los restos de Karen.
This was the lead Miriam needed. She spent months trying to find Sama, trawling through the internet and paying shady cartel members to help her. One day, she was scrolling through photos on Facebook when she stumbled across one of a young man whose face she recognized. He was tagged with the name Sama. And that tag has led her, many weeks later, to this neighborhood in Ciudad Victoria. Amazingly, she didn't have to hunt for him for long. One day, Sama happened to walk into the same shop Miriam's son Luis was in. Luis recognized him immediately and rang his mum. So Miriam left San Fernando and came straight here. And that's why she's currently roaming the streets, dressed as a government employee, clutching a clipboard. Over weeks and weeks, she follows Sama wherever he goes. She learns where he lives, where he eats, and where he meets his girlfriend. She writes everything down. Slowly, the stacks of papers start to grow. She puts together file upon file upon file. And it seems at this point, she realizes this beast is too big for her to tackle on her own. So she goes to the police. First, she tries the local office. Then she goes to the state office. And then she tries the federal police. But one by one, they turn her away. Ricardo says it comes down to corruption.
Y tenían a su servicio a todas las policías, las estatales y las municipales. De tal manera que si no hubo apoyo para auxiliar en esta situación tan difícil a la mamá de Karen para encontrarla, fue precisamente por este alto nivel de complicidad, de contubernio que entonces existía entre el cártel de los Zetas.
This is a key part of this story. The level of forensic detail and the sheer amount of information that Miriam has now collected not only on Sama, but increasingly on the whole cartel and how they function, should be judicial gold dust, a ready-made case. But the police want nothing to do with it. Finally, she finds one policeman who takes pity on her. He'll later talk anonymously to the New York Times journalist Azam Ahmed, who's covered Miriam's story in depth and conducted over 100 interviews for his report about her. A lot of the details in this episode have come from him. That policeman tells the New York Times reporter, "When she pulled her files onto the table, I'd never seen anything like it. The details and information gathered by this woman, working all alone, were incredible." The policeman finishes with, "To help her hunt down the people who took her daughter, it was the greatest privilege of my life." Thanks to Miriam, Sama is arrested in Ciudad Victoria's Central Plaza on the 15th of September 2014, 8 months after Karen was taken. Initially, Sama says he had nothing to do with it. He says he was just a lookout for the cartel and that he only heard about Karen from other people. But Miriam's sitting next to the police in the interrogation room, and she knows he's more involved than he's letting on. He's personally bribed her, even. The police keep pressing, and eventually, Sama begins to talk. He starts listing names and addresses of his accomplices. Miriam writes everyone down. And then Sama tells them what Miriam's been waiting to hear. He says that Karen's dead. Now let's step back briefly to understand what's going on in the wider context. In 2014, Mexico is going through huge upheaval. 8 years previously, cartel-related violence and corruption of officials was surging, and the new president, a man called Felipe Calderón, had promised to stop it. 8 days after taking office, Calderón had announced a war on drugs. Within 2 months, around 20,000 government troops were involved in operations around the country, and between 2008 and 2016, the US contributed more than $1.5 billion to the cause. However, Ricardo, the journalist, says that far from stemming the flow of violence and kidnappings, it seems to have made things worse.
El gobierno mexicano le declaró la guerra al crimen organizado, pero ningún grupo criminal fue destruido. Por el contrario, los cárteles se reorganizaron mejor, se asociaron unos con otros, empezaron a tener un dominio más continental que local, porque establecieron alianzas con grupos criminales de Colombia, de Panamá, de Costa Rica, de otros países del continente, y terminaron fortalecidos.
And with that, the number of kidnappings increased. Between 2006 and 2012, nearly 30,000 people went missing in suspicious circumstances. And in the 10 years after 2007, more than 100,000 people died in drug-related violence. We've already heard the story of the San Fernando massacre, the mass grave that was discovered in 2011. Just a few years later, in September 2014, the same month that Sama was arrested, 43 students disappeared not far from Mexico City, victims of an inter-cartel dispute. Many of their bodies have never been found. In both cases, it was reported that corrupt police and government officials were involved.
De muertes y secuestros, en realidad está directamente asociado a la inacción del Estado. Es decir, México está considerado desde entonces un Estado fallido, un Estado que no le garantiza a la población ni vida ni patrimonio, precisamente por los altos niveles de corrupción que imperan en el poder y a nivel de las policías y a nivel del ejército.
And the Zetas are one of the cartels at the center of it all. Cartels are big business. A 2010 study estimated they're making between $19 and $29 billion each year by selling drugs in the US alone. According to Ricardo, when it came to the Zetas, there was talk they were earning at least $100 million a year. Other reports suggest it could be as high as $350 million.
Porque involucraban no solamente tareas de tráfico de drogas, por el control que ejercían en una de las fronteras más bollantes que existe, que es la de Tamaulipas, sino porque ellos fueron los primeros que diversificaron sus actividades criminales. En ese tiempo había 15 grupos delictivos en México, pero los Zetas eran los que más actividades desarrollaban. A la par de que operaban el tráfico de enervantes hacia Estados Unidos, también explotaban la industria del secuestro, la venta de protección, controlaban la piratería, controlaban los giros negros.
The Zetas are not a group you want to anger. Sama's arrest in September 2014, 8 months after Karen disappeared, just stokes Miriam's determination. She's finally tracked down one of the people involved in her daughter's death, and now she's got the names and addresses of some more. The weeks become months, which become years. Miriam doesn't give up. She's absolutely tireless. She finds cartel members online and stalks them. She follows them home and studies their habits. She learns about their jobs, their childhoods, what neighborhoods they roam in. She learns that some have tried to leave the Zetas and start new lives as a taxi driver, a car salesman, a babysitter. But she wants to see justice served. It's almost implausible, but she single-handedly tracks them down one by one, hands her evidence to the police, and watches as the police have no choice but to imprison them. And she's becoming nationally known. She organizes mothers' marches and sets up a group called Colectivo des Desaparecidos to connect families who are looking for a lost relative. This is where she meets Maria, the journalist, who we hear from in this episode. By 2017, Miriam is reported to have tracked down 10 Zetas who were involved in her daughter's kidnapping and murder. And this is where, 4 years after Karen was taken, we come to the beginning of the end. It's the 22nd of March, 2017, and there's mayhem at Ciudad Victoria prison. A group of inmates have dug a 40-metre-long tunnel under the prison wall and escaped. News gets out that 29 prisoners are now at large, thought to be members of the Zetas, among them 2 that Miriam had put in there. Prison officials blame the age of the 40-year-old building and inadequate security measures. 120 miles away in San Fernando, Miriam is terrified. She tells the authorities she's worried for her life and asks for protection. They say they'll send police patrols to her house. She says she never sees them.
Yo no tengo la seguridad de irme a sentar a mi negocio, que es un lugar público, a trabajar, porque no estoy contando ni siquiera afuera una patrulla, algo que me dé la seguridad de mí, y yo seguir trabajando en mi negocio.
6 weeks later, as Miriam is walking on the street outside her home, a white Nissan truck pulls up behind her. They shoot her 12 times. Her husband finds her lying on the street, face down, with her hand in her purse, wrapped around a pistol, which presumably she'd reached for, but didn't have time to shoot. Miriam Rodríguez dies on the way to the hospital. It's Mexican Mother's Day. Miriam's death makes headline news in Mexico. People mourn the death of one of the country's most prominent activists. The National Human Rights Commission says her death highlights the government's failure to keep the public safe and calls for a full investigation. According to Maria, though, these are empty words.
La policía no se movía porque el crimen organizado tenía cooptado todo en San Fernando. No podían moverse. No hubo investigación de parte de la autoridad.
Maria points out that while the extreme lengths Miriam went to get justice do make her story stand out, she's far from the only one. Miriam was one of 26 activists murdered between 2010 and 2017.
Hay que recordar a Nepomuceno Moreno por la desaparición de su hijo de Nepomuceno. Fue asesinado este padre que reclamaba que su hijo apareciera. Luego está Marisela Escobedo en Chihuahua, asesinada frente a Palacio de Gobierno, asesinada prácticamente en la nariz del gobernador.
She says the cartels who are responsible face near total impunity.
El tema de fondo es la impunidad que ha permitido que haya más crímenes como el de Miriam. El gobierno fracasó en la protección a la comunidad, a la población. Fue un fracaso, porque los grupos delincuenciales, la policía estuvo coludida con ellos y la autoridad judicial, la que procura justicia administrativa y carcelaria punitiva. ¿Cómo te explicas que hayan huido de una cárcel estatal los matones de Karen, que fueron los mismos que mataron a Miriam? ¿Hay o no colusión con la autoridad carcelaria? La hubo.
We approached the Mexican Federal Police, the Tamaulipas State Police, and the San Fernando Police for comment. We asked them why they didn't pursue lines of inquiry more doggedly based on the evidence Miriam gathered, and why she wasn't given proper protection when she raised concerns about her safety after the prison break in March 2017. They didn't reply. We also approached the Mexican government. We asked them what's been done since Miriam's death to protect the public from cartels, to stem the rise in kidnappings, and to prevent corruption in the police. They also didn't reply. If you go to the Central Plaza in San Fernando today, you'll see a bronze plaque that's been put up in Miriam's honor. Miriam's husband, her daughter, and her son continue to fight in her memory. Her son Luis now looks after the collective she set up, which now connects around 600 families across Mexico searching for their own kidnapped loved ones. The number of missing people hit 100,000 for the first time in 2022. For Maria, Miriam's story shows there can be hope.
Creo que la historia de Miriam es para imbuir, meternos en la conciencia de cada persona que debemos luchar. No importa, creo, correr riesgos. Eso tenemos que exigir que paren. Tenemos que exigir, no solamente exigir, salir a la calle a exigirlo, porque no hay otra manera de que nos escuchen, de que se muevan las cosas hacia mejores estadios.
Today, the Zetas' influence wanes. They began to fragment through the 2010s, and in 2018 they suffered a major blow when the Marines caught one of their main leaders. They're now reported to be a shadow of their former selves, but there are plenty of others waiting in the wings. Today, the Sinaloa cartel dominates. In 2023, the US Justice Department said they run the largest, most violent, and most prolific drug operation in the world. Overall, Mexico's cartels are currently thought to have close to 200,000 members. That would make them the world's 5th biggest employer. Here's Ricardo.
Me parece también, por el nivel de violencia que hoy se vive en México, que el Estado no tiene capacidad de reacción precisamente por el altísimo nivel de corrupción que ha atrofiado la posibilidad de que cumpla con lo que exige y se plantea en la Constitución mexicana, que el Estado garantice vida y patrimonio. Si el Estado hoy no puede garantizar vida y patrimonio, entonces estamos ante un Estado mafioso, ante un Estado fallido.
This was True Crime Reports, a global crime series from Al Jazeera. In our next episode, we're in the early 2000s on a tiny paradise island in the middle of the Pacific, whose 47 inhabitants became embroiled in a sexual abuse scandal dating back 3 generations. Thank you for joining. See you next week.